Hola, so in today's video, you guys are going to be learning about verbos recíprocos or reciprocal actions. So reciprocal actions are actions that two people do to each other. So it's not a very difficult grammar concept because when you conjugate reciprocal actions, it's very similar to reflexive verbs. Earlier in this year, in chapter 2, you learned how to conjugate reflexive verbs, right? If you remember, reflexive verbs, the person doing the action did the action to themselves, right? So if you look at this picture, you have someone that is showering themselves. So the person doing the action is also the recipient. They're not showering someone else, right? They're not bathing someone else. So when we conjugate reflexive verbs, such as ducharse, bañarse, lavarse, cepillarse, if you recall, they all had a reflexive pronoun in front of it, right? When you conjugated it. So for instance, ducharse, we would say metese, nos, os, and se when we're conjugating the verbs, such as me ducho, te duchas, se ducha, nos duchamos, os ducháis, and se duchan, right? To state that the person doing the action is receiving the action of the verb. With reciprocal actions, we're only going to be using the reflexive pronouns se and nos. So the nos right here and the se because two people are doing the action to each other. So rather than one person doing the action to themselves, two people are doing the action to each other. Whereas here, like maybe these two people, there might be, pointing at each other. So then they're doing the action to each other. Like if two people were talking to each other, that would be a reciprocal action. So you would just conjugate the verb just like any reflexive verb and then use the appropriate pronoun. For instance, here, if we look at this sentence, it says, Todos en la fiesta se dicen hola. So here we have the verb decir, right? We can make it into a reciprocal action by adding the pronoun se in front of it. So here we're stating that everyone in the party says hello to each other, right? So they're all saying hello. Here we have the verb saludarse. It ends in se. It says, por lo general, mi hermana y yo con un abrazo. And you can conjugate in the imperfect, present, or the preterite tense. Here, since I say imperfect, I'm going to conjugate it in the imperfect tense, so it's nos saludábamos. So like in general, my sister and I would greet each other with a hug. So that's how they would greet each other. And it's in the nosotros form. We use the reflexive pronoun nos, conjugated in the nosotros form. Like here we have el novio y la novia en la boda. So what are they doing? They are kissing each other. So if you wanted to state that they kiss each other, we would say se besan. Here, I decided to conjugate it in the present tense. So here we have Jorge y Marta, and we want to say that they chat to each other every day, an action that they do to each other. So we could say se charlan. If it were the imperfect, we would say se charlaban. Here, los parientes la mano cuando se ven. So the action that they're doing is they're shaking hands, right? So they're shaking each other's hands. So se dan la mano. So here we have Jenny and Zoli. Maybe they could be greeting each other. They could be saying goodbye to each other. So we could say se despiden if it's that they're saying farewell. Or we could say se saludan if they're greeting each other. So to state that they do it to each other, we would use the reflexive pronoun se and conjugate the verb in the ellos, ellas form of the verb. Here we have mis amigos y yo cuando nos vemos. So what action are they doing? They are hugging each other. So it would be abrazar. So when you conjugate it, it would be nos abrazamos because it's mis amigos y yo, like my friends and I. We are hugging each other. Mis gatos cuando no estoy en casa. So if we wanted to state that they fight each other, how would we conjugate the verb pelearse in the present tense? It would be se pelean. Mis gatos se pelean cuando no estoy en casa. So as you can see, the reciprocal actions is not a really difficult grammar concept because when you want to state that two people do something to each other or that we do something to each other, you just conjugate the verb kind of like how you did with reflexive verbs, right? If it's in the ellos, ellas form of the verb, we conjugate the verb in the ellos, ellas form and use the reflexive pronoun se. If it's in the nosotros form, you conjugate the verb in the nosotros form, and then you add the reflexive pronoun nos. All right, so that is it for today. Nos vemos, chicos.